As you guys have seen recently, I have been debating people online about my philosophy of idealism, the idea that all reality is a phenomenon of consciousness, in consciousness, and there is no need to postulate this entire universe outside of consciousness that materialists postulate. In many of those discussions, I found myself debating materialists who actually do not understand materialism and do not understand what the implications of materialism are. And that's still a useful debate, but it turned into a discussion about educating people about materialism. And my real interest is in defending idealism, defending this notion that there is no need to postulate anything beyond consciousness. In this context, a reader posted an interesting message on my discussion forum online. The reader is Elliot Covert. Thanks, Elliot, by the way. Pointing me to a YouTube video by Kane B, who clearly has a background in philosophy, and he very cogently summarizes the ideas of one of the most famous proponents of idealism, Bishop Berkeley. And Kane B, as a materialist, represents Berkeley's argument actually very well. And he also mentions many of the objections against Berkeley's argument. And most of those objections are centered on the fact that Berkeley uses God in his defense of idealism. So for instance, when he's confronted with the question about what happens to the objects in my bathroom when there is nobody perceiving them in consciousness, do they stop existing? Berkeley would say, no, because they are still perceived by God. As a man from the early 18th century, this idea of using God in philosophical arguments was okay at his time. Today, it opens the argument to all kinds of critiques and criticisms, valid criticisms, by the way, because the concept of God is so overloaded and it seems such an easy escape when you're confronted with a critical question. What I want to do in this video is defend idealism from a modern perspective in a way that does not include any notion of God whatever, a purely non-theistic articulation of idealism, a modern articulation of idealism. And I want to address point by point the 5 key criticisms against idealism that Kane B discusses in his video. The first criticism mentioned is, how do you differentiate between perception and imagination under idealism? And of course the motivation for this is to try to establish a difference between something that is purely thought up and something that is actually real. And Berkeley's answer to this was convoluted and relatively weak. He starts talking about the qualitative differences between perception and imagination. That perception is involuntary and has some structure built into it, while imagination is voluntary and has less structure, less order, it's less organized. You can defeat those arguments by Berkeley with modern philosophical ideas. You can defeat it relatively easily. But of course, it misses the point entirely. The key point here, the key difference between things that are purely thought up, imagined, dreamed, or which are the product of visions and hallucinations and so on, the key difference between those and perception of the empirical world is that perceptions of the empirical world can be empirically verified. They are shared by more than one person. They are not personal and idiosyncratic. They are shared by several individuals. If you're sitting at the beach with somebody else watching the waves, you can cross-check and ask this somebody else, what are you perceiving? And this person will tell you, I'm perceiving a beach, and I'm perceiving the sun and the wind and the waves and so on. And it's exactly what you are perceiving. So the difference between imagination, dreams, hallucinations, visions, and so on the one hand, and perceived empirical reality on the other hand, is actually the fact that the latter is shared, is collective. It is not purely personal and idiosyncratic. That is the key, and Berkeley missed this essential point. The second argument in Kane B's video, his video basically just summarizes well-known philosophical arguments. He's not making these things up. The second argument is, how do you then differentiate between hallucinations, dreams, and visions, and perception? So he's making a differentiation between voluntary imagination on the one hand and visionary experience on the other hand. The answer would be the same. The differentiation is that perception is shared, collective, can be empirically verified through consensus, and visionary experience is personal and idiosyncratic. It's not shared. It's not shared amongst individuals, cannot be empirically verified through consensus. But there is a subtlety in the way this question is formulated, which is that unlike imagination, visionary experience is usually involuntary. And Berkeley addressed the need to establish this differentiation by saying that when you perceive, the contents of those perceptions are actually being constructed by another mind, not your own mind, since you're not constructing them voluntarily. And this other mind is then, again, the mind of God, and that's where God comes into the argument again. This of course can be defeated, and Kane B elaborates very cogently in this video on how to defeat this answer by Berkeley. I think Berkeley misses the point again. I think the essence here, which is something we understand today after over 100 years of depth psychology, is that is the differentiation between what is another mind and what is the activity of your own mind that is not being generated voluntarily. That is an essential differentiation. That you have a visionary experience that doesn't feel that you're creating yourself, doesn't require that it's being generated by another mind. It only requires that it be generated by a part of your own mind that you do not identify yourself with. We identify ourselves with only a small segment of our minds, which depth psychology has come to call the ego. The ego is basically a complex of thoughts and feelings. The ego is a content of mind itself. It is in mind. It is not mind. These are the thoughts and feelings that tell us who we are and who we are not. When there is activity in a part of our minds that is not within the boundaries of the ego, we perceive that activity as if it were generated by another mind, because it's not voluntarily generated by that part which we identify with. Let me try to give you an example of how this works so you have a feeling and intuition about it. If you close your eyes right now and you imagine yourself falling off a building in free fall, about to hit the ground, you feel that you're constructing those images yourself and that you have control over them, and that doesn't scare you, it's just an imagination. But if you dream that you're falling off a building in free fall and about to hit the ground, although the perception itself may be exactly the same, you may be perceiving, and I use the word perceiving here on purpose, you may be perceiving the same imagined images as you do when you actually imagine them during daytime without being asleep. There is an extra quality in the dream, a quality of fear, a quality of not being in control, which arises because the dream is being generated by a segment of your psyche which is not under the control of that other segment that you do identify yourself with. The perceptions themselves are identical. You imagine a fall or you dream of a fall, the character of the perception is identical. It's just the underlying feeling that is different. In one, you identify with what's happening, you know you're generating it, and you have no fear. And in the other, you don't identify with that part of your mind that is actually imagining it, and you do have fear. None of this requires that there be another mind. None of this requires bringing God into the argument. The visionary experience are simply contents of consciousness that are generated by a segment of consciousness that we do not identify with, by a segment of consciousness that we don't bring into that complex of thoughts and feelings that we call the ego. But it's still mind. It's still our mind, not another mind. The third argument is a classic. It is the question of what is the existential status of objects that aren't being perceived. Like if I put a bottle of wine in an empty room and I lock the door and nobody's perceiving what is inside the empty room, does the bottle of wine still exist under idealism, under this notion that all reality is in consciousness? Berkeley replies to this as yes, because it's in the mind of God. Kane B, of course, argues very cogently on why such reply by Berkeley is not a valid one. It brings all kinds of problems with it and defeats Berkeley's own argument ultimately. To answer this, I'd like to tell a story, a personal story. It has happened to me more than once that I was dreaming at night. I wake up at some point in the dream, like to go to the bathroom or something, and I remember the dream once I even noted down the dream. Then I came back to bed and I fell asleep again, and the dream came back and continued from exactly the point where it had stopped. Another example is schizophrenic hallucinations. If you've seen the movie A Beautiful Mind, you will remember that schizophrenic hallucinations can have a continuity not only over hours or days, but over years, over half a lifetime. It's a consistent, coherent storyline that unfolds and develops purely in the mind of the schizophrenic over years on end. The point I'm trying to make here is that the fact that the storyline of empirical life, of life in consensus reality, has continuity doesn't mean that it originates from a world fundamentally outside mind. All that it tells us is that there is continuity in that storyline. And there are other cases, like I just mentioned, of storylines that also have continuity over days and years, and which are unquestionably only in mind, like the visions of a schizophrenic, or a dream that continues after you wake up and fall back asleep. The continuity of the storyline can be explained by there being a segment of our minds, maybe a collective segment, a part of mind, a part of our collective unconscious, if you will, that unifies us all and therefore generates the dream we call reality, which we all share at an egoic level. It only requires that that segment is able to maintain the state of the storyline. That this is possible in the context of mind is known empirically from the examples I just mentioned. So the continuity of empirical reality across days, years, centuries, and millennia does not require a world, a universe fundamentally outside mind. The fourth argument is, what causes perception? If all that exists are contents of consciousness, perceived contents in mind, then what causes it if there is no physical, material world fundamentally outside mind and which then causes perception from outside the mind? Well, this question has a kind of prejudice built into it, and the prejudice is that whatever is perceived needs to be caused by something fundamentally outside mind. Well, that begs the question. This is precisely the point in dispute. We cannot assume this for defending the notion that there has to be a physical reality outside mind. You see, when you dream at night, you cannot subjectively tell the difference between a dream, the things you perceive during the dream, like the external world of the dream, the universe where you find yourself in during your nightly dream. You cannot tell that from waking life perception. When you're dreaming, you don't know that you're dreaming. You think that you're actually perceiving that external world. Yet unquestionably, those perceptions are not generated by a world outside mind. They are generated by your dreaming mind. It's just that they are generated by a segment of your dreaming mind that you do not identify with during the dream. So they feel external to you. This in psychology is called a dissociation. You dissociate with parts of your own psyche, which then acquire this feeling of externality. They seem external to you, while in fact they are being created and generated by you all along. Perception basically is the term that we give to a certain cognitive process whereby the segment of mind that we do identify with in waking life, that would be the ego complex, when that segment of mind communicates with the activity of another segment of mind that we do not identify with. So in the dream, the segment of mind that you do identify with is your dreamed up character. It's your avatar in the dream. And the segment of mind that you do not identify with, the activity of that segment, is the outside world of the dream that your character interacts with. The fact that your dreamed up character interacts with the dreamed up world shows that there is communication between these two segments of mind, the one you identify with and the one you do not identify with. That communication is what we call perception. It applies to dreams, and it also applies to waking reality. The only difference being waking reality is shared, can be empirically verified. We are all partaking in the same dream, if you will, in waking reality. And your nightly dream is idiosyncratic and individual. All we need to grant for this idea to make sense is that there be a part of our unconscious minds, a obfuscated part of our minds that we are dissociated from and which we do not identify with, that is collective, that is shared amongst all conscious human beings and maybe amongst all conscious life. The fact that we are apparently separate individuals because we have separate bodies does not mean that mind cannot be unified at bottom. If idealism is correct, then it is our bodies that are in mind, not mind in our bodies. So the fact that bodies are separate does not imply that mind is also separate. For all we know, mind can be unified at the deepest unconscious levels, and it is that part of mind, that collective unconscious that we do not identify with, that is generating the visions, the experiences, the perceptions of our consensus reality that we all seem to share. The fifth argument against Berkeley's idealism is, what causes anything? If all there is are perceptions and contents of mind, what causes them? Well, the prejudice built into this question is obvious. It is the assumption that anything must be caused by something else of a different nature. Ultimately, that leads to infinite regress, so it cannot be true to begin with. But let's try to gain some intuition about what causes our mental activity if all there is mind. Think of it this way. Let me give you an example. If you have a guitar and you pluck a guitar string, which then begins to vibrate and produce a sound, is there anything to a vibrating guitar string other than the string itself? Is there this thing called vibration separate from the string? Can you pick up the vibration in your hand and leave the string in the guitar? You can't. The vibration is a state of the string. It is not separate from the string. There is no such a thing as vibration other than the string that vibrates. Another example, a spinning top. Can we talk of spin separately from the top that spins? Can I hold spin in my hand without holding the top? Can we talk of spin without the top that spins? Obviously we can't. Spin is a state of the top. It doesn't exist outside of the top. It doesn't make sense to ask about the spin separately from the top. Now, experiences in general, perceptions in particular, since the argument focuses on perception, is a state of mind, like vibration is a state of the guitar string, like spin is a state of the top. It doesn't make sense to speak of experience, of perception, separately from mind. It doesn't require anything from outside mind to happen. It is simply a state of mind itself. For the same reason that vibration is not outside the guitar string, or that spin is not outside the top, reality is not outside mind. Now, of course, the question that can be asked is, fine, maybe we can see perceptions and experiences in general as vibrations of mind. But what then causes those vibrations? The question comes back. Well, whatever philosophical point of view one adopts, whatever ontology, whichever way one interprets empirical data, scientific data, you can never avoid the infinite regress of this question. You can never avoid being asked this question again and again and again. even if we adopt materialism and we say the world began at the Big Bang, well, fine, what caused the Big Bang? Or if you say that the world began with the collision of two membranes in membrane theory, fine, what caused the membranes? You never avoid this question, whether you adopt materialism, idealism, or any other ontology. So this is simply not a reason to believe that idealism is any less good an explanation as all the others. And in fact, it is by far the best explanation on an empirical and logical basis, because it is the most parsimonious and has the most explanatory power.